Since 2014 there has not been a single Formula 1 car that has had less than 8 gears. However, in this video I'm going to be racing 0% AI, the lowest difficulty on the F1 game, to see if I can beat them using only 1 gear to prove that they might not be as bad as you actually thought. So I'm sure you're wondering what gear I'm actually going to be using. I'm driving around the Jeddah Corniche circuit in Saudi Arabia, which is a high speed track, so I've gone with 7th gear, as well it's not quite 8th gear and you can still reach 200 miles an hour. Because I'm using 7th gear, my acceleration is predictably dreadful, however I knew that I'd make this up literally everywhere else. I try and go around the outside of at least 5 cars into turn 1 and I somehow didn't get damage after making pretty heavy contact with Bottas. Coming out of the second corner I thought I'd started pretty well. I was alongside Perez in 14th, no surprise there, however I got absolutely destroyed on the exit, which was humbling, and I got the feeling I was in for a pretty long 5 laps. I've made up 4 places in the first 3 corners, which I was very happy with, but now I was focused on trying to build up some speed and then find a way around Valtteri Bottas through this fast section of corners. I eventually get past him around the outside between turn 7 and 8 and I'd managed to maintain minimum speed, which was absolutely crucial. So I won't lie to you, this isn't my first attempt at this challenge and the corner coming up is so important for overtake, so I was desperate to make some progress. I held back on the entries of the corner so I'd barely have to brake and made my way around Sergio Perez and Esteban Ocon. With the high minimum speed that I kept up, I was now right on the back of Zhou Guanyu and then side by side. We're now coming into the faster section of the track, which would definitely benefit me, and I managed to brake later than Zhou, so now we were up to 12th position. Now I'm coming onto the back of Daniel Ricciardo, and this was a very simple overtake, which was exactly what I needed, and as you can see here I just outjagged him, but this wouldn't actually be the last time I see him. Anyway, on this back straight it was the first time I managed to rev out 7th gear, and to my delight I was comfortably able to hit 200 miles an hour even without the use of DRS. Now we're into turn 22 and I stupidly backed off from Oscar Piastri, which almost blew me and Daniel Ricciardo up. This wasn't ideal, so I basically just cut him off as I had no time to waste because I needed to be making some more overtakes. That was my final overtake for lap 1, so I'm quickly going to skip through the rest of this lap and let's have a look at my progress so far. I've made 9 overtakes, which I'm pretty happy with, however it's only going to get harder from here as the field spreads out every lap. Coming into turn 1 here and I'm just on the back of Oscar Piastri, and for a moment when we were side by side I actually thought that I was going to overtake him, but I had a little wobble and then accelerated like a Formula Ford car, so I dropped back quite a lot. Now we are coming into the faster section of corners of this track, so at this point I concentrated on increasing my speed so that I could get past Oscar Piastri. If I could get this overtake done it would put me into the top 10 of the Grand Prix. Anyway, I got onto the back of Oscar pretty quickly, but I was held back quite a lot through turns 5 to 8. Thankfully though, I did eventually get past him after he made a bit of a mistake on the exit of turn 8, which was exactly what I needed. We are now coming up to turn 9, which as I mentioned before is absolutely crucial for making progress in this race. Once again I backed off quite a lot and narrowly avoided Yuki Tsunoda as I went round the outside of him, but annoyingly this time I could not get anywhere near Alex Albon on the exit, so I'd have to just stay behind him for now. However, I was pretty confident that by the end of this lap I'd be able to get past him and Carlos Sainz, who was just up ahead. Now we are going through turn 17 here and I've actually managed to get a better exit than Alex Albon, so I turn on my ERS button and squeeze past him, which moved me up into 8th place. Now we are on the back of Carlos Sainz, who was in 7th place, and I was closing in on the fastest cars. Didn't use a flashback there, that's just your eyes deceiving you, and I also definitely didn't use hindsight to not go down the inside here. And I decided to get a better exit and make a pretty nice overtake around the outside of turn 22 and 23. Right, so we'll skip over the rest of this back straight as nothing happened. Coming through this final corner I managed to go really deep, which set me up for a really nice exit and eventually got me past George Russell. However, I knew that my acceleration definitely wouldn't help me if I wanted to stay ahead of him. I managed to keep him behind me for a second, however we had a drag race to the first corner where I eventually outbroke him, but this advantage wouldn't last for very long. Into this first corner here I was pretty hesitant to let George pass or try and delay the inevitable with my shocking acceleration. This acceleration, as you're about to see, was a massive hit to my progress. Leaving the second corner here, Russell was flown past me and then Carlos Sainz does the exact same thing. Straight after this, Alex Albon almost got past me, however I wasn't going to let that happen as that basically would have knocked off an entire lap of progress and I didn't have time to waste. I'm not going to lie, after this I was pretty disappointed and I genuinely thought that I wouldn't be able to complete the challenge. However, I pressed on as I'd made up 12 places in only 2 laps, so I had faith that I'd be able to make up for my mistakes. Leaving turn 8 here, I managed to get a really nice exit and got back past Carlos Sainz. It was a pretty simple overtake and I was straight away focused on getting ahead of George Russell. Annoyingly, I couldn't get past George through turn 9 and I almost wiped him out from behind. So as we skip through the second sector I was pretty frustrated that I couldn't get back past George, but as we come back to normal speed I was lining up a move. I squeezed up his inside and made up for my previous sector 1 mistakes. So in the past 3 laps I had made up 14 places in 3 laps, which is pretty good, and I was now coming up to the lead group of cars. These 5 cars ahead of me were all pretty close together, however I wasn't confident that I could stay with them as I thought I'd be losing too much time in the first sector, but thankfully I would be mostly wrong about this. Coming into the final corner here I'm 1 second behind Charles Leclerc, but because the 0% AI they brake so early and I've got no idea how I didn't get damaged, but the worst bit about this was my acceleration would be dreadful, which would cost me so much time. And as you can see here, I was already checking to see if George Russell was going to get past me. He was very close to overtaking me because he had so much more straight line speed. However, I held him off at turn 1 by braking later, but I was definitely stressed about holding him off through the first sector because I couldn't afford to lose positions. I had an alright turn 1, however through turn 2 I turned in way too early and tried to get a good exit. Thankfully, even with my poor acceleration, I stayed ahead of George through being able to brake later and could now focus on recharging my battery and getting up to the lead group of cars.
He just fully turned into me.
Now you're going to have to forgive me for this, but as you're about to see, my overtake on Lando Norris is honestly quite appalling and I should have given him the place back. But as you're about to find out, it was probably the right decision not to let him back through. So next up was Charles Leclerc, and I've got no idea why I banged against the wall there. However, we're coming into turn 9, which is one of the easiest overtaking spots on the track. I eventually made my way around him. For the first time in this race, I was into the top 4 of the Grand Prix. But as you're about to see, I literally did not make any more progress for almost the rest of this entire lap. I seemed to make up a lot of time through the corners, but lose it all by the end of the following straights through me revving out the engine, which definitely wasn't ideal, so I knew I had to go for a late move into the final corner. Coming into this final corner, I made a late decision to dive up the inside of Lewis Hamilton, but Max Verstappen kind of got in my way for acceleration, and I knew that this was going to hold me back big time. Leaving the final turn of lap 4, I had less than 5% ERS, and on the F1 games the AI dump about 50% on the final lap. This was shown pretty much straight away as I borderline squeezed Lewis Hamilton into the wall and he still managed to fly past me, but once I got in his slipstream I managed to stay with him. I obviously managed to outbrake him into turn 1 and I was desperate to stay ahead of him as I couldn't let Alonso and Verstappen get away. My run for the first 2 corners were crucial for the outcome of this race as I needed acceleration, and thankfully they were decent and this would be just enough to stay ahead of Lewis Hamilton even with the help of a little squeeze. And as you can see here, I forced him out wide and managed to cut him off into this corner, which was ideal. Next up was Max Verstappen, and through this first sector I was able to almost go flat out, which allowed me to set up a move on him. So as you can see, I'm gaining a hell of a lot of time on Max. Anyway, I'm honestly not too sure if what you're about to see was my fault or Max's fault as we made contact, but I thought I left enough space on my tyres were at least alongside half of his car. But then again, I'm probably expecting a little too much for the lowest difficulty on the entire game. With 2 sectors left of this race, I was just behind the race leader Fernando Alonso with no spare ERS, so I know I'd have to go for a pretty big send if I wanted to try and take the lead. I tried it around the outside of my favourite overtaking spot at turn 9, but I think I was a little bit too far back to begin with, but I still managed to gain about half a second. Coming through turn 16 here, I am to be just behind Fernando Alonso leaving the corner, and even though my entry was pretty shocking, I managed to close up a little bit, which was ideal. The DRS activation point was just up ahead and I desperately needed some straight line speed help. Anyway, the only corner left that I could genuinely overtake at was the next corner, turn 22. I stayed a little off the racing line and absolutely sent it up the inside of Fernando and just about squeezed through. This was pretty nerve-wracking, but for the first time I was in the lead of the race. However, I knew that the race wasn't won yet and I had to have a good exit out of the final corner. Leaving turn 24, Fernando was straight onto me and I had no ERS left, no DRS and no slipstream, and I was desperately trying not to give him any advantage. Into this final corner, I knew I had to take a wider line so I could get a slightly better exit as I was certain that Fernando would lose time under braking. Now we are on the run to the line. Fernando was catching me at an unreal rate and gaining a tenth of a second every second. He pulled out alongside me and we finished side by side on the line. However, I had just enough of a gap and successfully completed the 1 gear challenge versus 0% AI. Thank you all for watching this video, and by the way, I've also seen your comments about real life content and I've got an unreal opportunity coming up in a few months which is going to be a different perspective to a different motorsport.